Good afternoon, everybody. This is the North Sydney Local Planning Panel, and we are here today to consider two planning proposals. There are no development applications that this panel is hearing today. We as a panel, I will introduce the panel very shortly. We as a panel are here to make a recommendation to the Council on the planning proposals before us today. And it is then a matter for the Council as to whether they accept our recommendation or not. But we purely make a recommendation as opposed to development applications where we make the determination as such. The planning panel today comprises of myself, Jan Morell, and I have Lloyd Graham is also an expert member of the panel, and I have David Logan, an expert member as well. Thank you. And if you'd both like to just introduce yourselves briefly as to what your background is.
Yep, David Logan. I have a background in architecture, urban planning and heritage.
Thank you. Lloyd?
Yes, Lloyd Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a background in town planning and economic research.
And Virginia Waller, she is online as well. So I don't know whether you can all see her there. I hope you can, if you've got your screen with all members participating. But Virginia Waller is our community representative. And Virginia, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Jan. Hi, everyone. I'm Virginia Waller is my name, and I've been on the panel for since its inception in 2013, and I'm a registered architect in New South Wales, and my capacity on the panel is as community representative, as Jan said, and as an architect.
Thank you. And I'm Jan Morell, and I've got some many years, 40 years or so experience as a town planner. So this afternoon we'll just go through to the first item. Apart from the panel only making a recommendation to the Council on these planning proposals, I would like to also indicate that we have each inspected the sites, so we are aware of their context. And we have the benefit of the Council Officer's report. I would also just like to comment to the effect that this is very much, we do not have many community members that have sought to join us this afternoon, but this is very much the beginning of the process in terms of the rezonings. This is a preliminary beginning of them in that the Council, first of all, have to resolve to support the planning proposals going to a gateway determination. And applicants also can ask the department after a period of time to take action on their planning proposals, depending upon what the Council's decision is. So it's very much, it's the early stages. Once the planning proposals are recommended to proceed to gateway, it's after that stage that there is then public exhibition of all rezoning matters. But these are, the Council's very transparent, and these planning proposals come to this panel, and we do allow the public to make a comment as well, even though it's prior to any exhibition. So the first matter that we have on the agenda today is the land bounded by the Pacific Highway, Falcon Street, Alexander Street and Crow's Nest. It's also known as the Five Ways Triangle Site or the Crow's Nest Triangle Site. And this afternoon we have the applicant's representative, Stephen Kerr from Glide Consulting, to address the panel, and we have people registered to speak. I have John Hancox, the chair of the Wollstonecraft Precinct. Are you there, John? Thank you. Yes, you're on mute, but you'll be able to unmute yourself when you speak. We have Sue Yelland. Thank you. You're here, you're present. Greg Colburn. Thank you. And you are representing Daycorp. And we have Stephen Cox from Turner Architects. Thank you. And as I said, Stephen Kerr from Guide Consulting. So I'm going to first of all ask the community representatives to address the panel. So John Hancox, could you please address the panel?
Thank you very much. Our precinct has followed the progression of planning for this site since 2018, when it was first mentioned in the draft 2036 plan as a significant site with potential for taller development because of its strategic location. In response to that, we gathered just short of 1,900 signatures from the community of Wollstonecraft and Crow's Nest on a petition that objected to the overdevelopment of the 2036 plan area, and specifically to the categorisation of the site as significant. At that time, one developer was suggesting 50 stories for the site. We formally objected to each of the applicant's previous proposals and to the draft 2036 plan. When the 2036 plan was finalised in August 2020, the site designation of significant was removed and instead designated as suitable for 16 stories based upon internal advice from the government architect. That advice that was never exhibited for community consultation and ignored the civil planning study done by the North Sydney Council, which they did with proper community consultation, that settled on 4 stories as the appropriate height for this site. Now we find ourselves confronted by a proposal that seeks to obtain approval for a height limit of 63.5 metres that would, after approval, permit a DA with up to 18 stories with consequential increases in dwelling numbers from the stated 129 apartments and an increase of the 247 parking spaces as proposed in this planning proposal. Fortunately, Council has made it a condition of its recommendation to proceed to gateway determination that the height be limited to 56 metres so that the building envelope will allow a maximum of 16 stories, and has recommended an amendment to the DCP, which among other matters reduces the number of car spaces to 77 for clear reasons that are spelled out in the 2036 plan and fully explained in Council's report. In summary, this proposal, like those before it, even as modified, is overdevelopment in our view because it will add significant additional congestion on arterial and local roads. Within the Crow's Nest plan area, the Pacific Highway, River Road and Falcon Street are all choked by traffic in peak times and very busy at other times. Local roads are congested constantly. Transport for New South Wales made no substantial recommendations to help relieve traffic congestion in the final 2036 plan. And you can see this on page 56 if you look at the plan. These recommendations ignore the impact of the Warringah Freeway upgrade, which because of the closure of the slip lane onto Falcon Street, will increase that portion of shared traffic flow exiting the Bradfield Highway onto the Pacific Highway and north from 50% to 100%. The plan has also failed to recognise that the additional 2,000 dwellings in the St Leonard's South residential development would result in any significant increase on congestion of River Road and hence onto Shirley Road and Crow's Nest. Further, this will contribute to overcrowding of schools. The Department of Education was investigating 2 new schools in 2018, as published in the draft plan. And when the 2036 plan was exhibited or gazetted in 2020, their position is exactly the same, still investigating. You can see this on page 43. It will contribute to added pressure on health services already overstretched because of continuing pandemic and ongoing influenza cases. It will contribute to the demand for more utility services, councils and other statutory bodies. The community is rightly outraged by the 2036 plan, but this proposal and the 2 that preceded it by the same applicant
Thanks.
were all blatant attempts to obtain approval at the zoning stage and then later amend the planning in a DA that would fit within the approved envelope. The applicant has demonstrated that it cares not for the community and is endeavouring to maximise its return on an audacious investment made on the slim hope that planning authorities may sympathise with their overpayment for the site. No such consideration is deserved, nor is it justified. The precinct fully supports the council report, which is made in the context of the final 2036 plan, but remains opposed to that plan, particularly to the 21 sites within the boundary of the plan that were gifted additional height above the draft plan without any public exhibition or community consultation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And can I now invite Sue Yelland to address the panel? Can everybody hear me? I'll just double check.
I can hear you.
Right, okay then,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much, Ms Yelland.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Wollstonecraft and I live quite close to this site. I also spoke at the planning panel meeting on the 5th of May last year when the previous planning proposal for this site was assessed. The council report prepared for this meeting comprehensively sets out the background of planning proposals for this site. As you would have seen, there is a long history of previous proposals, even longer than what's set out in the council report, I think. I'd like to commend North Sydney Council for adopting consistent and well-justified assessments of the series of proposals that have come before on this site and for this one as well. I note on this occasion, Council is suggesting that this proposal is satisfactory to be advanced for gateway determination, subject to amendments. The amendments Council is requesting are crucial from two aspects. Firstly, to lessen the impact of this development on the surrounding community. And secondly, when one considers the level of change this area is undergoing, the cumulative effects of a series of proposals in this area. I think it's very important to focus on what the cumulative effects are going to be. I support the amendments Council is recommending, especially the reduction of the requested height in metres to 56 metres.
Sorry, yes, I'm just closing the door.
Oh, sorry.
The reason why we're all sitting here with our coats on because they're trying to freeze us here.
Oh, right.
But that's okay. And so we had the door open for some warmth, but we've now
Oh,
closed.
sorry. I just didn't know if there was interruption in the room.
No, I just wanted to make sure that you are being heard and we're making
thank
sure.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the amendments Council's recommending I support, especially the reduction of the requested height in metres to 56 metres. There seems to be a pattern with planning proposals being lodged in North Sydney since the release of the 2036 plan. Overly generous floor-to-ceiling heights are being submitted, but being presented as compliant in terms of heights in stories, as shown in the 2036 plan. In this proposal, the applicant's floor-to-floor heights are excessive, and as Council's report points out, would allow a building of more than 16 stories specified in the 2036 plan. Excessive building height will affect the surrounding community, especially in terms of overshadowing and visual impact. I support further wind tunnel testing that Council's requesting. To date, Crow's Nest has been somewhat spared of the wind tunnel effects of St Leonard's. I do a lot of walking in this area and the difference in the wind effects in St Leonard's compared to Crow's Nest is really striking. I also strongly support Council's report recommending the amount of car parking proposed for this site be reduced. I commend Council for addressing the issue of parking rates. Considering this is the fourth planning proposal to come before your panel in the last few months, the issue of traffic generation cannot be ignored and must be dealt with. At certain times of the day, traffic in the Crow's Nest St Leonard's area is already at capacity. The entrance to the Woolworths car park is at times very problematical, as is the turn from Alexander Street to the Pacific Highway, especially the right-hand turn from this street, not to mention the Five Ways intersection itself. With the amount of future development proposed for this area, cumulative traffic impacts must be addressed. One way to do that is to reduce reliance on cars as a means of transport. Council's recommendation for reduced parking rates on this site is consistent with and responds to a recommendation included on page 60 of the 2036 plan itself. And I quote, "Availability and accessibility for parking is correlated with traffic generation. New development should consider car share schemes and reduced parking provision within the precinct. It is recommended that each council reviews their existing parking rates and promote car share facilities and end-of-trip facilities to support active transport." So thank you to Council for addressing this essential issue, especially on a site with a multitude of transport options at the front door. To reduce the parking rates on all sites near the Crow's Nest Metro to be consistent with those which apply around St Leonard's train station and in areas around other train stations in the North Sydney area seems eminently sensible and fair. To conclude, even a building in this location which fully complies with the 2036 plan will result in very significant overshadowing, visual, wind and traffic impacts for the surrounding community. This is why I support the amendments Council is recommending. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Young. Now, can I turn to the applicant's team? And in this regard, Mr Kerr, are you taking the lead for the presentation? And I'll leave it in your hands as to who you wish to speak at which time.
Thank you, Ms Merrill. I will. Stephen Kerr, Guide Consulting. I'm a town planner. With me in the room, as we mentioned earlier, Greg Colbrand, the Development Director from Daycorp, Stephanie McMullen from Daycorp also, and Stephen Cox, the architect from Turners. I'll hand over to Greg and probably mop up at the end. And of course, I'm available for any questions. So, Greg, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Afternoon, panel, and good afternoon, everyone else who's involved in the meeting today. First of all, from Daycorp's point of view, obviously, we'd like to thank the council for this report, indicating that the planning proposal is considered satisfactory to be forwarded to the Department of Planning, seeking gateway determination. Further to that, we look forward to working very closely with the council in preparing site-specific DCPs. But one of the things that we would like to address in detail today and take this opportunity to discuss, as I said, further in detail, is our proposed building heights and the manner of how those building heights have come about, and in relation to the new regulations and where we sit as not only as a developer, but as a construction company, of why we have put those building heights together. So in doing that, I'd like to just hand over to Stephen Cox from Turner Architects, who would like to take this opportunity in detail to go through the reasoning for the standard heights that we have at the moment. Thank you, Steve.
Good afternoon, panel and others. Thank you for the chance to talk through these issues, because they're quite complicated issues, and they are various factors that contribute to why we've set the building heights the way we have. The sort of, I'm going to start in the middle, because I think there's a very important understanding the commercial space as being something that really sets the building height. So just to set the scene, as you know, the site is quite, as we had visited it previously, the site is quite sloping, and there's a level change of about 3 metres from the corner of Falcon and Pacific Highway to the lowest point, which is near the corner of Pacific Highway and Alexander Street. So the ground floor has got a sloping plane that we need to deal with, but the commercial floor plate needs to perform at a high level. In the Crow's Nest area, there's a lack of high quality commercial floor space, and we think this building could really assist at providing a high quality workspace that is suitable for different groups, such as medical uses, educational uses, and general workspace uses, all of which have been identified in the plan and different reports associated with the plan as being appropriate for the area. The PCA guide to office buildings, which is really the determining guide for sort of grading different office buildings, would see that this component of the overall building could be a grade B building. It can't be a grade A building because the building's not quite big enough for commercial office space, but a grade B at 3,000 square metres minimum would be possible for these commercial levels. They are looking for a floor plate of a minimum of 700 square metres, which is a large proportion of the commercial floor plate as it is. We've designed the commercial floor plate to be quite flexible to allow a single user to take the 2 floors or a single floor, but also to be tenanted into smaller areas if needed to be. So we think it's quite important to maintain that flexibility in order to be able to deliver high-performing commercial floor space to the Crow's Nest area. And that really requires our level 1 slab to be straight across the site and not to step down following the terrain of the ground floor. So I prepared a series of just sections, street sections that will start to sort of work through the different, these are very small, but we're going to see them larger. They work through each of the street frontages and the corners. So the one here, and I will go into I'll zoom in a minute. This is Falcon Street at the corner of Pacific Highway. And across here,
sorry, Greg, can I just, Stephen, can I just interrupt for a moment?
Absolutely.
Is this new material or was it included in the bundle?
This is not included in the bundle. So
okay, thank you.
I can, if you'd like me to go back to the bundle, I can do it. But I thought these were just, you'll see that they become larger and they start to address exactly what's happening in slabs and sit downs to clarify this particular issue.
Okay.
So would that be helpful? I'm very happy just to explain.
No, that's fine, but I just need to understand whether it's new material or not. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely new material. Yeah. So how about I come, this is a good one. This is the corner of Falcon and Pacific Highway. So this is just showing the retail level, the commercial levels, the 2 levels above that, and then the residential levels above. I've also approximated the position of 30 Willoughby Road. This is working on the actual street width of Falcon Street, so we can understand the sort of picture of the street walls, the street widths. It doesn't have any of the trees on it. I'm sorry, there's one on one of the others, but we could add them. This is also showing the height of 30 Willoughby Road compared to the podium height. So we think it's important to understand the context of the street walls around the site. So this is trying to make a picture of that, and I can discuss the comments directed to that a little bit later if there's time. So this is the most challenging corner for the retail because this is where the site is highest. So right down the bottom here, you might be able to see it. The existing floor-to-floor height, existing RL is 99.14. So our ground floor is set slightly above, so we can stop the water going into our retail. So at 99.2. And these you'll see vary around the site. We change this level so we can meet the street at all sides, so we can have very high performing retail. So this is lowish for an important street retail at 4.2 to a ceiling height. There's a tenant zone indicated for services above here. So that's for mechanical systems and other things. That of course will vary depending on the tenant. And then we have the 2 commercial levels above. So 3,700 is what we've allowed for level 1. And that includes that tenant zone dotted in above, which is, as council says, a typical height for commercial. We would sometimes do 3.8 or 3.85, but we can work with 3.7. And then this is the controversial one, the one from level 2 to level 3, which is our first residential level, which is 5.2. And it's understandable that that would be seen as excessive. But there's a number of things that need to go on between this commercial level and this residential level that we need to take into account. And so in this diagram, some of that is shown, and I can zoom in a little bit more, maybe. I might have to zoom out, let's move you out of the way. So if I come down a little bit so we can see it a little bit more clearly. So there's a number of sort of different considerations that we need to take into account at this point to make sure that the whole building works. So there's a commercial floor-to-floor height, or 3.8, 3.7, that needs to go in there. We will need to allow for some sort of transfer to come from the 13 stories of tower into this podium. So we'd like to avoid the transfer if we can, but as the site's triangular and we're coming from a car park grid that's going to come up through the retail and commercial levels, and we're going to meet a residential grid, which is never that fond of car park grids above, and a triangular site, we think that it's wise to allow a 1.4 metre structural transfer zone. In the detailed design, we might be able to reduce this and knock it down a bit, but it's really, there's no way a floor is going in there. There's 1.4. We also, from experience, think it's quite important to allow different set downs coming from a residential space into a terrace and then into a podium. The stormwater that collects on these podiums is considerable. And so we need to make sure there's a good solid step down into the garden in order to prevent water coming back in to the residents. The whole step down and slabs and waterproofing has got absolutely increased prominence, certainly since when we started working on the site. David Chandler has everyone running scared and really recommending different considerations for waterproofing. So that comes down to our 3.2 that we've adopted for the residential floor-to-floor heights. We see this now as a minimum for residential buildings because with slabs to falls as recommended, and even waterproofing internally with step downs, which are also recommended, we think it's almost now impossible to make 3.1 work and achieve 2.7 ceiling heights in residential areas.
And sorry, Stephen, if I could also add to that, Greg Colburn here again, on behalf of Daycorp, as we are not only developers, we are builders with over several thousand apartments under construction at the moment. It's a like of underneath the new building regulations, and as Stephen has alluded to with Mr. Chandler as well, our slab thicknesses are increasing, our step downs are increasing, the inlay of pods, which is our bathroom pods, our step downs are being picked up anywhere between 25 to 30 millimetres. Our external step downs have now increased from 86 to 100 millimetres. These are under all the new practices. And on top of that, our slabs are being thickened from a minimum 200 millimetres up to 220, in some cases 230. So these increased heights, even at 3.1, we can no longer achieve those. We are now, the new buildings that we have on the drawing board now, we're allowing 3.3 to work our way through.
So for further information on this, I'd recommend Ross Taylor's article in LinkedIn from February 2022, called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Waterproofing. So, Ross Taylor is the waterproofing specialist who's responsible for the TAFE waterproofing guide, which is David Chandler's recommended sort of minimum standard of waterproof construction. That's you can see that course on tape. Or I'd recommend advice from a regulated designer, which is the sort of new standard for Class 2 buildings, to understand some of the issues and of the Design and Building Practitioners Act that are really causing this here. So the other aspect that I've just missed here is the soil profile. So we see the opportunity of this structural set down that we won't need on the edges when we get out of the residential apartments, because there's no structure to transfer. But this area we can use as a soil zone and achieve a metre, maybe 1.2 of soil profile, which will allow quite reasonable sized trees, maybe not quite like this, but reasonable sized trees to be planted on the podium. So we think this large setback on the podium, which council has appreciated, which is great, is important to consider. So we think by using this set down zone, then we can achieve this decent soil profile and have a quality landscape solution on the podium. So I'm just going to work up fairly quickly. We've also looked at the upper floors. The plant area was also questioned. You can see we've adopted 3.2 here. It probably needs to be 3.3 to allow for thermal insulation to be added into this top floor. You'll get heat loss through this upper apartment. We've allowed something like 3.5 metres for the rooftop plant. And that really allows the lift overrun to come and terminate in the rooftop plant. it'd be really nice if we get 4.5 above there, because that would allow us the lift to come out on the rooftop and we could service the plant. But we can work it through the stair. And hot water plant and other mechanical plant that will need to be on the roof will be around 3 metres, 2.8 to 3 metres. So that allowance lets us to put the plant on the rooftop. So we're not proposing any residential stories on that level. So this works through all the different frontages. This is the other end of Falcon Street, where we've dropped 2 metres. So the RL is now 97 rather than 99. So you can see the extra floor, so floor to ceiling height's taken up in the retail area. Everything else runs the same as we come up the facade. And you can see 16.3 is the height of the supermarket building across the road, which is roughly the same as the podium we're proposing. Coming down the site through Alexander Street, this where you can see this becomes quite high, but it's great for our public walk extending through the building, which is another point we'll talk through a little bit later. This building on 5 Alexander Street, right across the road from the public walk, is sitting at 17.5, which again is quite similar to the height of the parapet at this height. So we see that these street wall connections, one side to the other, are really important to pick up as we work through the site. And then the last one's really looking at Pacific Highway. And then this becomes quite high on this corner where it's the lowest point of the site. This dotted line way up here is actually the building at 250 Pacific Highway, which is a strata residential apartment building and not part of the incentive floor space provisions of the 2036 plan. So we see this as a sort of a permanent fixture at the south end of the site. It was also identified in the SJB report, I've got that here, about a building that actually contributes to the consideration of a street wall. That was in a design report looking at this site in particular. Because there is increased floor to floor height, we have a retail mezzanine that sits as part of this retail floor. So we're not including this as a story because of how NCC considers mezzanine spaces, but it's a technicality. So we're very happy to talk through that further with council to work out how this would work.
But it is counted as GFA.
Yes, it's certainly counted as GFA. So this is part of our GFA. And so hence this commercial level all the way through is sticking at 104.4, giving us that larger floor plate and allowing that flexibility of tenants. So I'm sorry that was quite a long description of the different frontages and how we've looked at the different heights along the site. We don't think, taking those sort of considerations into account, it's a underhanded way to come back with 2 additional stories in the future. We would not find that councils or planning panels are particularly open to those sort of things in a DA application after a planning proposal. We're quite used to be told that that was what the planning proposal considered, and therefore we won't be thinking otherwise. So I don't know if there's any questions on that particular matter. I can roll on to some of the other comments. Any comments from the panel?
Do any members have a question?
Not on that.
No, not at
Okay,
this.
sure, that's good. Okay.
And Virginia, please let us know if you've got a question at any time.
No, thanks, Stephen. I appreciate from an architect's perspective the increase in coping with like thermal insulation, slab thicknesses, set downs, and understand that. And that was a good overview of how you've developed that. It's quite detailed. So
yeah,
thanks.
That's good, thank you. We try and work with the real world in these things, because we just know that sometimes decisions are made and then they're very hard to wear later on. So that's good. Thank you for that. I just wanted to talk about the next point on the FSR, and there's a bit of comment in the council report about GBA to GFA efficiencies, and there's suggested efficiencies that would be appropriate for this site. I would say that that was curious to me why a GBA to GFA efficiency was mentioned, particularly as the ADG doesn't ever mention the term GBA. So the ADG likes to use a term called building envelope, and I would recommend referring to part 2B and part 2, F, but part 2B and part 2D in the efficiencies that the ADG recommends. So the simplest one is part 2B, where a recommendation of 70 to 75% is used as a minimum for assessing the efficiency of a floor plate, which is quite different to council's rates. And the other aspect is that the ADG really recommends testing, and that's proper testing in terms of working out block plans and doing apartment layouts on those envelopes to make sure that the assumptions actually hold true. This is a triangular site and has particular issues in terms of normal efficiencies. And so we would recommend discussing our actual planning and the indicative plans that we've provided with the planning proposal to talk through the efficiency. If we did talk about GBA to GFA efficiency, we would actually be quite efficient if the GBA on our indicative plans was submitted. So we think that the block plans are important to review. So council has proposed a different floor plate, and based on a different set of assumptions and using those efficiency assumptions to a sort of a sketch, what I presume is a SketchUp model. We have had tested that model, and we're a little bit concerned that the building width of the residential component goes up to 38 metres wide. So we're not quite sure how to plan apartments in a building width of 38 metres wide. The ADG recommends 18 metres wide as a better figure, and hence we need a different type of building to the one that's proposed in the report. So I think that would be a good thing to talk through with the urban design panel staff at North Sydney Council to make sure we can understand some of the complexities of trying to make an ADG building work on this particular site, and to make sure that we're using terms that we can agree about efficiency and how envelopes and GFA is considered. So that's about it. Unless there's any questions on that particular issue, it's a more technical issue. I'll roll on.
Related, Stephen.
Oh, yes.
In your sections, the setback above the podium seemed to be less than 6 metres to the face of the balconies, which will be what you read. So what is the dimension that you've drawn there?
It is 6 metres. I'll just, let me share it again. Sorry, I've lost my window. Let me share it again. So I think, I'm pretty sure I drew it at 6 metres, but if I go to the...
It looks like it's taking in the balcony of the apartment.
So the terrace...
What is it to the face of the balcony?
Yeah, so can you see my mouse here? Yeah. Or I can draw it on?
No,
I believe this is 6 metres here. If I draw the line here.
Right.
I think I'd be fairly confident at 6 metres if you look at the 5 metre here. So where a terrace extends into the podium, we would not consider that as part of the building. So like we could cut it back and put the terrace back here, I suppose. Look, we can design this today if you like. But yes, this I believe is 6 metres, pretty much.
Yeah. So related to that, I didn't quite get what you were saying about the depth of the apartments.
Okay.
So
can I?
Are you suggesting that therefore it should be a more slender tower form?
Yeah. So if I just I'll bring up. This is. Hang on, 1 minute as I jump between different documents. So this is the massing. It's got some other paraphernalia on the ground floor that I hope you can not look at. But and it's actually not on the site. But this, I don't know why it was on the site. But this is the floor plate of the that's proposed by council based on my sort of trying to work out from those images how it worked. And this distance across here is 38 metres. So if I just then compare, like there's a particular solution we've used to try and deal with this triangular site. There's a particular strategy, and if you hang on, or of course it was the wrong file, but if it's right at the back, so I'm just going to zoom in shortly and show you. Thank you for your patience. So this is our indicative plan. I believe this is I think it's a typical tower. So the strategy we have adopted is to try and use this central void in this envelope in order to make the width of each of these wings of the building very narrow, so that the apartments have very high amenity because they have, a good frontage compared to the depth. And we can use this area as an open area and have gardens and so on the outside. So we're keen to sort of make this quite a high amenity space. So there's an example of this building that's been completed recently in the paper mill precinct in Liverpool, which is, I think, a good example of how this can be quite successful at very much the same size, about 16 stories. That building might be one more. But so we would argue this building actually has a very narrow plate in terms of amenity of apartments. Whereas if you can imagine, if you're trying to build apartments from one side to the other across this void, it's going to be highly challenging. So I would say, a rule of thumb, we would find it very difficult to think of apartments deeper than about 10 metres. And so these ones on the Alexander Street are deeper apartments. So these are probably approaching 10 metres in depth, but still a plan of high amenity. Does that help your question?
Yeah, I think so. So the setback on Alexander Street, or from Alexander Street, what's that?
That's 6 metres. We've used 6 metres everywhere, I believe.
Okay.
So this is
the draft DCP was submitted as part of the planning proposal, and it shows a minimum 6 metre setback to the residential towers on all three frontages.
So I think this dotted line here, which is you can hardly see, is the 6 metre setback zone. Okay, so we've tried to take that everywhere up the building on the residential level. Sorry, I've got to get rid of all my graffiti.
So I just don't quite understand your comment about 38 metre depth apartments. I don't think it was ever assumed that there'd be apartments 38 metres in depth.
No, not at all. It's as far as I understand, and I'm trying to interpret the design, the alternate design that's forwarded from council. As far as I understand, there's an envelope that was, or a set of GBA plates that were generated, and then there was a calculus given to translate GBA to GFA, and therefore I'm not saying that council believed that we would be touching every part of that envelope, but my concern is the way that I understand the ADG and how to deal with master plans and planning envelopes is you set up certain widths of a building and determine the distances from building to building, and then you can fill it in with the apartments or whatever else afterwards. So my concern is if the envelope is set up at 38 metres wide, then we're well outside of how the ADG is considering the appropriate way to generate a building form, like a rough building form. So my question is, how is it done, I suppose? And we've proposed a different way of doing it, and we've justified it with our indicative plans. So we think that by showing how the apartments are actually laid out and testing them whether they achieve ADG criteria is the right way to go. So from my professional intuition is that the alternate massing that's been provided by council is unworkable. And that could be my ignorance. It could be that I don't understand what council has proposed. I think we need the envelope as shown, as we're asking for, to achieve the yield that we're asking for, to achieve the FSR 5.8. And
to achieve design excellence.
Yeah, to achieve design excellence as well. Thank you, Stephen. And so when we're talking about this technical issue of GBA to GFA efficiencies, I think it's the wrong tool to evaluate whether this design is excessive or not, or meeting good design standards or not. And so I'm trying to justify why I think our proposal is the right way to consider it.
I think there are two things that we're asking the panel to support us on today. One is the building height, as Stephen has explained. And I won't repeat his analysis, but to build a modern, high-performing apartment building that will satisfy not just David Chandler, but also those who are concerned about amenity. 63.5 metres is needed for a 16-storey building on this site. If there are concerns about trying to sneak in extra floors, we can certainly nominate 16 stories within the DCP so that there is a reference there. The second thing we're asking for in relation to the proposed the proposals for the DCP really is just the opportunity to talk those through with the council staff as the draft DCP is being prepared. Last Thursday was the first we saw of these proposals. That's quite understandable. But we would like to just go through. Our fundamental concern is you can't design a high-performing apartment building within the envelope that's being created in this report. And in the absence of any floor plans or any detailed architectural work, we're at a bit of a loss. But if we can work collaboratively with the council staff as the DCP is finalised, I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing. But that envelope that's in the council report now locks us into something which we don't believe can actually be made to work in terms of ADG.
I don't think it's meant, Stephen, as a control as such. It was probably just an alternative way of trying to calculate what the built form would produce. So at the end of the day, it's a matter for the applicant to design the building.
That's
yeah,
true.
but within that envelope that's shown as a diagram in the report, we don't think we could design a building, not one that meets today's standards.
And there's a desire to step the tower to the southern part, which is part of that envelope. And I understand why that intuition is there, but that does rely on the assumptions of that envelope working in terms of generating GFA, an appropriate GFA. So what we're saying in response is we actually need the envelope that we've asked for to achieve the GFA and achieve the high amenity that we're looking for in these apartments.
I think what sometimes fails is that the FSR is a maximum. It's not the ultimate as such necessarily. Sometimes you may not achieve 5.8 to satisfy all the design criteria and ADG requirements, etc. So people tend to, I know that the applicant is looking at the 5.8 to be achieved on the site, and that's how you've worked your calculations. But at the end of the day, it's a maximum just as a height is a maximum.
Well, but this is a planning proposal, and what we're trying to achieve is the recommendations of the Crow's St Leonard's 2036 study, which recommended an FSR of 5.8 to 1 on this site with a minimum non-resi FSR of 2.5 to 1 and a maximum height limit of 16 stories. And that's what we're delivering in this planning proposal. If we don't, if we don't achieve those targets in the 2036 plan, then what we're doing is sort of undercapitalising on the public investment in transport infrastructure and not realising the plan. If this was a DA, I'd probably almost agree with your statement, Madam Chair, almost. But this is not. This is about setting controls that will achieve the objectives of the plan. The objectives of the plan are very clear: 5.8 to 1, 2.5 to 1 non-resi. Our job here is to determine what controls we need to put in place for this site to achieve that plan.
Can I just clarify then, what you're saying is to achieve a buildability in the current environment of 16 stories, you can't do that in 56 metre height, you need 63.5, is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
So that is inclusive.
But you could take off 2 levels, but then that would reduce your yield, and so it's not a viable solution.
Well,
No,
but that's a 14-storey building, and the plan's asking for a 16-storey building.
Maximum.
Do you know how that 16 stories was derived?
The plan is, yes, we will.
Well,
Yeah, good question. But it's the plan that was adopted by the minister and published, and is an extension of the district plan now.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering whether you knew what the rationale was. You know, was there an environmental consideration? Did people consider the impacts of overshadowing of the houses in the conservation area, etc., which is an issue for the additional height?
yeah, David, there's quite a prescriptive shadow controls that are part of the 2030 plan, and the SJB that were informing the plan and the government architect investigated much taller building heights on this site, and so there were in that report I flashed up a minute ago, that actually considered 3 different building heights and settled on 16. So that was in looking at overshadowing and looking at yield capacity and other things. So it'd be a good question for the Department of Planning to see exactly how they arrived at that. But there was certainly a lot of deliberation on the height on the site.
Mm.
And the 63.5 that you're seeking, so you're saying that would then be inclusive of all plant and lift overruns, etc., whereas often we allow lift overruns to exceed the height limit as such.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct. We think it's better practice to try and get it all into the start. Many of the DAs that I see with planning proposals are going through the height limit because none of those allowances were considered at the first point. And from a community point of view, I think
so how much, Stephen, are you allowing for lift overrun and plant?
We have 3.5 allowed on the roof level. That was it was in the section that was up earlier.
Yep.
I can show you.
No, don't go back to it.
No, that's okay. But
I believe your maths.
The lift overrun's probably about half of that, about 1.6 into that 3.5. But it's things like stair pressurization fans, hot water plant particularly gets up there, the balance of condensers, and other services like that. Maybe a sprinkler tank at this height. So they tend to be around 2.8 to 3 and a bit more. And then photovoltaics would sit there and probably take the last bit over the top. And then there's always an aerial.
But also, as Stephen, both Stephens have alluded to, we just find it important that when we're looking at the massing and what we're putting through now is to have that as an open book. There it is. It's an overall height, which allows, and I know when I was looking through the reports, there was 2 buildings that were recommended that could fit within 16. Well, one of those buildings is already asking for additional height for the lift overruns. So, and that's something that, it's all cards on the table here. This is what it is. This is what we believe we need to design an efficient building in today's times.
Okay. Yep.
Yep.
I was going to go back to the street wall height, which was the next contention in Council's report. That was sort of answered in in those street sections where the different street conditions were considered. It's also in the urban design report, and I don't really want to go through that if you've already reviewed it. The key argument here is we think that the existing context is a relevant consideration, and although the 2036 plan says a 3-story street wall, we don't believe that all of those street walls are going to be affected by the plan, because some of them aren't incentivised with additional FSR. So just to show you quickly, we prepared this diagram for the report that really tried to characterise all the different frontages and showed the podium heights relating to the different points of the site. There is an urban design argument in the council report that talks about the gateway element of the building and seeing the Falcon Street corner as the key corner, and therefore the additional height should be on Falcon Street and Pacific Highway rather than the Pacific Highway and Alexander Street corner. So we understand that argument. I suppose I would question whether a podium and in a podium and tower situation, whether anyone would really consider the podium as the gateway element or the important part of sort of appreciating the site when there's a big tower that's quite a bit higher behind it. What we found though, when we looked at the site is the taller buildings are at the southern end. That's where you see taller buildings than you do at the northern end, which is much more affected by the lower scale through Willoughby Road and the Crow's Nest Village. So we do see scale increasing rapidly around the metro station, which is about 200 metres away. But we think that these taller buildings, that especially this one, which is not incentivised at sort of the south end of the site, contributing to our podium height. But this is also really dependent on the commercial levels and trying to keep them level and usable. So that is also propping up the podium at the southern end. So we do think, we do think that the context is an important consideration and a relevant consideration in assessing the height of the street wall. So I don't think I've got anything more to say on the street wall unless there's questions.
Yeah, so in that regard, when you say the context is important in assessing the height of the podium, have you mapped the heights of the heritage buildings that are around that intersection, or, you know, particularly around the Pacific Highway intersection?
Yes, have you seen this plan here?
Yeah.
So this is in the report, in our urban design report.
What page is that, Stephen?
This is page 60. Such a large, I'm sorry, it's large. It's page 60. But this looks at all the buildings that sort of are in close proximity to the site. Like we could do more if we needed to, but we thought this was a good start. And then we identified the heritage buildings here. Yep. So they're all in, and they sort of group around the northern part of the site. And there's this little fella over here.
Yep.
Here's the heritage buildings. And then we work through our, I'll talk about this one in a second. Then we walk through.
So you've identified the street wall heights of the heritage buildings, have you?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, and then how does the proposed podium height on Falcon and the northern part of the Pacific Highway, how does that relate to the heights of the heritage buildings?
Well, the most relevant building, and we can talk about what I mean by relevant, is this building here, which is the one I showed in the section looking through here. When we thought about that bit part of the building. So that is a very similar height to our podium. Like what
about the Crow's Nest Hotel?
This one here, this is a lower building.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing though is that the 2036 plan and council are looking at 4 stories on this corner. So all the contrary advice is actually asking to increase the podium, where we're trying to set it to this height. And we think at this end, where there's fewer heritage buildings and there is observed height, to have this taller by keeping our first floor flat and using our mezzanine in the retail area. Does that help?
So just to clarify, your proposed podium height on Falcon Street, what is the RL of that versus the RL of the Crow's Nest Hotel? Okay,
so we just simplified it a little bit. And so the Crow's Nest Hotel, we're seeing at 15.7 metres above the street.
Yeah.
And our podium is about 16 metres. Okay. So I think we're 90, in that corner it's 99.2, and the floor level of the thing is 108, I think. So it's pretty, and there'll be a parapet as well. So it'll be fairly close to that, but we saw that as similar enough.
Okay, thank you.
So you said 16 metres, did you?
Oh,
including the parapet?
I think it is. can I refer to my section again?
Yes, yes, of course.
To my section.
Yep.
So what do we got here? We've got 5, 8.9, 14, 9, 15.1, and then there's a bit more. It's pretty close. Pretty close to 16. I'd be comfortable with 16. Pretty close.
Okay,
Is that helpful, Jan?
Yep.
Good, okay. Let me go back to the other screen. Any more on the street wall? I think that's it's when you go in and look at the site, you think it actually is a little bit different to what you perceive as you walk around these streets, or think of it on a map, but it's really working with these heights that we see in the southern part of the site. I was just going to talk about the public walks that we have on the site and this division, which has also been raised by council as not appropriate. We saw these as extensions of the urban grid and not simply just a quick way to go for pedestrians to go between Alexander and Falcon and the bus stop. And we think having two of them on the site really help with permeability of retail. So we've adopted a place measure that looks at activation in the ground plane and being able to break up the retail into smaller components. We want to keep the commercial in a large object so we can get flexibility. With the retail, we need to allow sort of a very granular approach to get, we don't see this site, it's not going to be a supermarket, it's not going to be a large, we don't want a large showroom, we want this fine grain retail and different uses. So these different colours all can be added together or they can be single uses. So we want that flexibility. And we've adopted the sort of texture that we see in the street wall, particularly in the heritage buildings, the more interesting buildings, as instructing the way that the facade would be broken up and thought about as a street wall there. So I think there's some more that sort of, projecting it up and seeing how it sort of feels as we go up the street, and then allowing, some adaptation in different points. So any other comments on those pedestrian links? The other issue, the council's, it's a technical issue, but council's preferred one would go right through the vehicle entrance, and we can only enter vehicles at one point on this site. So that's a bit of a bugger because that diagonal one will just go straight through the ramp. So we don't think it's practical. So this also helps us squeeze the ramp on the side of this one that's on sort of going more east-west. Happy to comment further on that one or carry on.
Oh, it's Lloyd Graham here. Can you address this question of overshadowing and also the suggestions in the report regarding a reduction in car parking spaces?
Yes, I think that's great. Thank you. That one next on my list, Lloyd. That's really good.
Thank you, bud.
That one next on my list, Lloyd. So that's awesome. Thank you for bringing them up.
Good. Thank you.
So I'm just going to go back to my report for a minute for this. So we summarised the 5 controls that are to do with overshadowing from the 2030 plan. So I'm not sure if you've reviewed this, Lloyd, but I'll just really quickly, there's nominated public spaces that can't be overshadowed 10 to 3 p.m. No additional overshadowing of nominated streetscapes from 11:30 to 4:30. The residential areas need to have at least 2 hours inside the 2036 plan boundary, and areas outside the 2036 boundary can't have any solar access reduced at all between 9 and 3 in midwinter, and the HCA heritage conservation areas inside the boundary need at least 3 hours. So they're the 5 things. So we've looked at each one. So here's one. This is the nominated public open spaces. So fortunately, we don't have any of those next to our site, so that's not a problem. And then these are the nominated streetscapes of Willoughby Road and these Oxley and Mitchell, so we don't affect those. This is where we become, the sort of meat of our overshadowing. So this is the areas inside the 2036 plan boundary, which you can see is the dotted line. So areas above the dotted line are within the boundary. Areas to the south or below the line are outside the boundary. So this is the shadows cast over those areas. And a lot of the sort of intensive shadows is really on the streets, and in the residential areas, they sort of just get a small amount. So you can see how much it moves from 9 to 10 and from 2 to 3. So they're the areas where they're more critical for the residential areas. So we're confident this complies with the 2036 plan. 4 is the plans outside the area boundary. I got them wrong, sorry. This is outside, this is inside. So it's been a while since I've looked at this report. And so we've looked at each of these sites to make sure that we don't overshadow for more than 2 hours and they can maintain the 2-hour solar access that the plan requires. And then this is the heritage conservation areas. And so we do come into that area for in late afternoon, but it still complies with the 2036 plan in that area. It's really the 1 hour at 3 where it's in that area. Does that help answer that question, Lloyd?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so they're the critical ones. So, you know, this is all based on the heights as proposed. The parking, I'll do my first bit and maybe Stephen will add. The parking, it's admittedly, the DCP is what's in there. So the DCP is a bit of a damned if you do or damned if you don't. But at the moment, we're working with the DCP plan. So we understand that there is probably discussion on what the appropriate amount of car parking is on the site. And I think that's a discussion we're happy to have with council and with the Department of Planning. Absolutely.
So are you saying that you're not requiring the 7 levels of basement parking?
Well, we wouldn't need it if we didn't need that many cars. I think there's, to start with, we thought we would show a maximal amount, just so that was there, we could understand particularly its effect with the metro line. But we in the absence of a proper control from council that had a minimum rate or a lower rate, we put in just the maximum rate. So should there be an agreement to reduce the parking, then the basement levels will reduce, of course.
Well, we're actually here to understand and to make a recommendation to the council in terms of the numbers, the quantum of parking. Council's officers have recommended a lower parking rate because of the investment in public infrastructure and the metro. And so I'm just trying to understand what the applicant's position is, because it seems to me that you wouldn't require the 7 levels of parking. And are you saying that you're prepared to reduce the parking?
I think that we would be prepared to reduce the parking. The issue is... I didn't catch that. You would or you wouldn't? We would, Jan.
Yep.
And I suppose our issue is we've only received these comments on Thursday afternoon.
Correct.
Yep.
And so I don't think we've completely come to terms with what demand we think is required to support the proposal in its current state. But I think we are expecting that it's going to reduce from the proposal.
And just for Greg from Daycorp, just to take that a bit further and rely on what Stephen has just said. Again, we only just received the report. You can see the work that we've put in the report to try and make everything as crystal clear as we possibly can. And there are just a few things that we need to sit down and start to have a look at. And one of them is to do with the car parking. But from Daycorp's point of view, we're more than willing to come to the table and put our bit forward of what we require needs and see if there is some sort of common ground that we can work our way through with council.
Just on that point, there was page 39 of the report. There was a statement there about concern over the proximity of the basement and any footings on the integrity of the Sydney Metro line. That might just be something that you might want to think about.
Yeah. Yes.
If in fact there is any relevance or concern over that.
Yeah, and I agree with that comment wholeheartedly that at the moment we've got 4 different projects that sit right on Sydney Metro, whether it's on Sydney trains, and we know what is required. We know what to be working with these guys, and it's something that we fully take on board in what you're saying, and can assure you that is something that we would be doing, is working very closely with Metro.
Okay, thank you.
Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought that a previous proposal, which was for much greater FSR and everything else, there weren't 7 levels proposed in the development. It was more like 4.
Oh, I can't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't know. It could be we put the wrong plan in. It's the levels will be based on the plan. We've included indicative plans of the basement in our proposal documents. I think that support an efficiency or expectation of a number of cars we would get to per level.
5 levels.
I don't know, is it just basement 5?
Yeah.
We're not really seeking approval for basement levels. I'd say, except we are seeking approval for a number of parking spaces.
But again, as we alluded to, we're more than willing to sit down and have that open conversation with everyone.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Any other questions from the panel? Virginia, are you there?
Yes, Jen. No, no questions.
Right, okay then, rightio. And I just to clarify, if you wouldn't mind, Greg, in terms of the, or not so much Greg, perhaps Stephen, in terms of the overshadowing, so you're saying that the additional height doesn't create any more overshadowing than what was anticipated, is that right?
Go on, Stephen.
The 2036 plan has quite explicit criteria in terms of overshadowing. In fact, they're more stringent than the North Sydney Council DCP criteria. And what Stephen Cox was demonstrating with those diagrams is that our shadow doesn't extend. It doesn't even come close to extending outside of the area contemplated by the 2036 plan, and that we more than achieve the minimum requirements for sunlight in the different places, including the heritage conservation area.
Okay, thank you. So that's in terms of criteria, is it, Stephen, as opposed to a shadow line that was projected for the 56 point?
Yeah, the 2036 plan did two things. One, it drew a boundary of the study area, and it said that that there is to be no overshadowing at all outside of these boundaries. And then within the boundary, it said that you had to ensure that any overshadowing didn't cause any properties to receive less than 3 hours of sunlight a day in midwinter, obviously. And then it nominated other specific areas like the heritage conservation areas. So it's both of those things. It's a specific line on a map that you can't go outside of, and within that line, then there's criteria which are number of hours of sunlight per day in midwinter.
And the other thing I just add is the 56 metres is council's reckoning of the height. There's no height in metres given in the 2036 plan. So it's quite difficult to assess how high the massing model and what assumptions we use for the massing model that sits within the 2036 plan. And the final version of the plan is pretty studious in avoiding showing that in any detail.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, back to car parking, the previous planning proposal had 7 basement levels.
Right, okay. All right then, nothing further, no further questions? No, is there any other comments that you wish to make, Stephen?
No, I think there's too many Stephens. There's always too many Stephens in our project. No, there's no additional comments. As I said, there's really two things we're asking for. One, please, the 63.5 metres was very carefully considered, and it's not an ambit claim. And you know, we really would like the LPP to support us on that. Two, there are quite a number of concerns we have about some of the proposals for the draft DCP. The car parking isn't so much one of those concerns. They're things that really we can work through whilst the planning proposal is going through its own motions. And so what we would like is just the opportunity to sit down with council staff and share the reasoning for what we've got and to understand whether there's
while you've got the opportunity now, Stephen, would you like to tell us what the concerns are about the DCP?
Well, I mean, the concerns are they're very prescriptive. Well, two things mainly. So, there's a proposal essentially to reshape the building envelope for both for the podium and for the tower. in the absence of detailed floor plans, we just can't see how you can design an ADG compliant building within that envelope, let alone a building which achieves design excellence. The second concern is there's a proposition to create a public sort of a plaza area on the corner of Falcon Street and Alexander Street, and only have one through site link, which I question the sense of providing a plaza on Falcon Street, which, as we heard earlier, is only going to carry more traffic in the future, not less. Two, having only one through site link and in the location proposed.
So I'm just trying to understand how the through site links line up outside of the property boundaries.
They line up with the existing. Well, they connect to the existing street grid. Stephen's going to grab the photo. And where they arrive at is the bus stop, which is a very major bus stop.
Yeah, I've got this. Sorry.
There you go. There it is.
It's
it.
yeah.
Oh, we're about to share the screen.
So if I just, so what we thought was really interesting as we were planning the site was this laneway that I guess it's Alexander Lane that sits. It's not in good shape at the moment here, but it turns into something more interesting as it's further north. That was to right across from the site, and then
that's the loading dock for Woolworths. That rear lane.
That's correct. It's underperforming at the moment. We think it's an underperforming lane, and
but you're not going to be able to take away the loading dock.
We won't, but there's several reasons we think it's good. Visual permeability through blocks is great. To be able to stand on Civic Highway and look all the way down through here and sort of see into the Crow's Nest Village further where we're not looking at loading dock, we think is a worthy urban design principle to do that.
Well, I drove down that laneway today and I don't believe that it's got the visibility or permeability that you're talking about.
There's nothing blocking this laneway. Like if you stand at this point, you can look, you can
but
see.
There's nothing that attracts you down it as such. At the moment, it's back of house loading dock and whatnot.
I think there's a worthy urban design principle in view lines, extending view lines through the urban grid. So if you don't think
but is that the view line? Is that the view line to take? Wouldn't it be better to try to connect into Willoughby Road maybe? Or
Well, it's much more difficult to do that and to split the corner of the triangle. And also, we're not proposing to change the pedestrian accesses across this street. Like we want to see that as a more visual connection and use that to start to get a fine grain in our retail podium.
Okay, and they're perpendicular. The one that crosses Alexander Street, that's just a block of buildings there. There's no lane there. Are you going into another rear lane?
We're suggesting to align with this rear lane would be a worthy thing to consider in the urban design of this block on the eastern side of Alexander Street.
But is that saying it's going to be redeveloped? Because there's no lane at the moment through that block that you're showing. You're showing a dotted line.
There's none, but the building that sits in that area on the edge of that line is actually a low scale building. And we think that this type of development and the impetus to reconsider these sites around Crow's Nest would really look at these two sites, or actually three sites at the end of towards Falcon Street.
I mean, I think the idea, the principle of having through site links has a lot of merit, and on the proposal that you've done, it does have merit. I'm just wondering. My question is, are they the appropriate ones? And I guess you could further develop that.
Yeah, I agree. But the other thing too is to look at that in detail what we've looked at for this ground floor plane. And I think as Stephen Cox was alluding to earlier, we're not looking to throw a supermarket in relation to this store. We're trying to break it up into smaller, which gives us frontages, which gives us an area that's activated and an area that's actually people will want to visit and walk through. You put one site link through there, all you're doing is cutting from one side to the other, and you just end up with very minimal frontages to try and make a ground floor plane like this active and appealing for people to come to. So that's where our main thoughts were coming from, that where you have two site-through links, it's obviously allowing us to have more street frontages, more activation.
It also gives us an appropriate breakup of the elevations of the building. So this starts to suggest where the building is articulating. And although this link may never come, the one on Alexander is really a suggestion for a future urban grid that might or might not occur. But,
yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So we think it's a worthy suggestion. On another master plan, I'm being terrorised for not considering the future context. It's interesting in this one. The opposite. But we think this is worthy to consider.
I think as an urban design, it is, it does have merit. You don't want to put a big supermarket because there's already a supermarket on the corner.
You wouldn't be putting one there, no.
But by breaking it up like this gives us the opportunity to be able to come through with different types of businesses in there.
And what makes Crow's Nest really special is its fine grain of retail.
Yep.
So we really see extending that into this zone. Like this is full of Thai massage and mobile phone shops at the moment, and we think there's enough of those. So we want to try and make something generous in height, high performing, giving a fine grain. We think these links are probably better places for outdoor dining to be little bit protected from these. Falco Street and Pacific Highway are quite busy. And so we think, give a little bit of cover in these spaces, let people trade out into a tighter laneway, and then give some visual prompting of a nice street a few blocks away, if possible. So that's the sort of consideration. Very happy to talk with council about the merits of that at another time.
Okay, I think we're up to Stephen. Stephen Kerr, you were telling us what the components of the DCP that council officers had suggested that you had issues with.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm just conscious we're here for item 2 and conscious of time. I don't want to truncate this discussion on an important matter, but just want to be aware that we do have some significant matters we would like to discuss in the time allocated, please.
For the second matter, you won't be in any way penalised whatsoever. Can I just suggest that we will call you when we're ready to start the second item?
Well, we're happy. We have a time slot of people available. We were told it's 12 to 2 and we're available. But is it going to extend beyond that?
It won't extend beyond 2, no, that's for sure. You will certainly be given your.
Well, we'll hang on because obviously it's only half an hour to go, and we do.
We can be available longer than 2 o'clock. So as long as you're.
Well, I can't be sure who's available because we've made that time available, but we just want to have sufficient time to go through in a similar manner.
Can I suggest that we will ring you as soon as you're required? Well, we won't be much longer, but
we'll hang on. We will hang on if that's all right.
Okay, if you could go off screen, then that would assist us as well.
I have been, yeah.
Thank you. So yes, Stephen, I want you to just tell me other parts of the recommendation in terms of the DCP that you have issue with.
Well, I think that was it broadly. It's obviously the podium, the breakup of the through site links, the heights we've discussed, and the massaging of the building envelope above the podium. We just don't have any confidence that we could design a building that achieves the ADG, let alone design excellence. And you'd appreciate that you design these things in detail to test an envelope. Which we've done, of course, and we would just like to work through with the council staff who are under a lot of time pressure to produce the report that's before you today, and so there wasn't an opportunity for engagement at all since we lodged the planning proposal, and I think both parties would really benefit from sitting down and understanding these issues before a draft DCP is actually put up to the council for adoption for public exhibition.
And sorry, if I could just add on to that to Stephen, is that here to work collaboratively with council, but to understand their methodology. of what both guys have been talking about is what is their rationale and what they're coming up with. The work that we put in to come up with our rationale and understand and just make sure we're all on the same page of where it is, how council can see how they are designing up certain buildings and criteria.
Yeah, so Stephen, are you saying to us that you would seek a deferral so that you could have the opportunity to...
No deferral, Madam Chair. The planning proposal, as everyone in the room would appreciate, will take quite some time to go through. It needs to go from here to the Department of Planning for gateway approval. There's an opportunity during that period to sit down with the council staff with regard to the DCP, which doesn't need to go to the Department of Planning for approval before a draft, the actual draft DCP, we don't have a draft DCP before us at the moment,
Yep.
Is prepared and presented to the council for adoption for public exhibition.
Okay. Well, I was just seeking to understand if there are any fundamental issues that
Fundamentally, we don't
further explored, but I can hear what you're saying.
Well, fundamentally, we don't think the building envelope works.
Okay, now I hear what you say. Yep. All right then. Okay, no further questions on this matter, and I'm not being pressured to end this call by others, but I just want to make sure that you feel like you've had the opportunity to suggest what you would like to say to the panel, and as you know, we're only making a recommendation.
Yeah, we have. Thank you very much.
And on behalf of Day Corp to the panel, everyone, thank you for your time today, and you have given us a very good hearing. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Very well. We'll go on to the next item, which is item number 2. Item number 2, and for this particular matter, we have once again John Hancock's registered to speak, and Sue Yelland, Jeremy Bishop, the architect for the proposal, and John Wynne, Urbis Planning, and Barry Nesbitt, applicant. So is everybody here that I've just nominated?
Yes, we're here.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. Okay then. And can I now invite John Hancock to address the panel?
Thank you very much. I didn't have time to prepare anything substantial, so I'll pass on to Sue Yelland who may have been something.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Ms. Yelland?
Yes, look, I don't want to take up time, given we're short of time, it seems, but I'd just like to reiterate some of the things I said in my previous presentation. Many of the same issues apply to this site, I think. Primarily the excessive height in metres for the height in stories in the 2036 plan, the consequent additional overshadowing because of an excessive height in metres, even if it complies with the overshadowing provisions of the 2036 plan. There was something that Council pointed out in their report, which I thought was very accurate, that the requirement to retain 2 hours of solar access in midwinter is undermined. That's 2 hours of solar access to houses or residences inside the plan area. It's undermined when a cumulative approach is adopted for buildings. So to hear that a particular building will still allow 2 hours of sunshine doesn't take account of a building just to the north or south of that, which will add to the cumulative effects of overshadowing. And of course, the car parking reduction. Once again, this site is just across from the metro, so I would support Council's recommendation that car parking be reduced to something more in keeping with a metro line just opposite. So I won't, I think you understand the issues I'm talking about, and I think most of them apply to this site just as they did to the earlier one. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yolland. So now I'll go to the applicants team, and who would like to lead us off there? Would that be the planner from Urbis?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's John Wynne, Director of Planning at Urbis. So appreciate the opportunity to address. We have, similar to the previous presenters, I'd like to provide just an initial overview from a planning perspective, but we'd like the bulk of our presentation to be the opportunity for our project architect to take you through the design rationale. And then also the proponent, Barry Nesbitt, is available to make some closing comments. So we don't intend to take a great deal of time, but there are a few key points we'd like to make. So first of all, can I say on behalf of the proponent...
Can I just say that you're not prejudiced in any way by the fact that we were perhaps longer than normal for the very large Five Ways project. So I want to make that statement quite clear.
I greatly appreciate you clarifying that. You know, we are very used to having to deal with very defined timeframes with the panels, and we saw 2 hours, and we were conscious of having sufficient time to present our so but I appreciate you saying that. On behalf of the proponent, we'd like to express our very strong frustration and disappointment in the assessment report prepared by council officers, and in particular, the recommendation to not support this planning proposal. The frustration is largely born out of the fact that up until a few weeks ago, we understood that council officers were supportive of the proposal, and we'd worked very cooperatively over a long period of time to address a range of issues. So to get the report as it's been put forward now is a significant disappointment given the effort that all parties have put in. As the panel is aware, after many years of work, the state government finalised the St Leonard's Crow's Nest 2036 plan in 2020. Now, this plan was informed by extensive community and stakeholder engagement, including with North Sydney Council, and comprehensive consideration of land use, built form outcomes. The approved 2036 plan designates desired land use mix, building heights, floor space ratio, street wall heights, setbacks, and overshadowing controls. And the accompanying ministerial direction requires proponents to submit proposals reflective of the adopted plan. That is what we are required to do. We need to address and show how we're consistent with those plans. It's important, and we think that the panel appreciate that this proposal has been submitted in a manner which is fully compliant with the key controls set out in the 2036 plan. And they include a building height of 18 stories, an overall floor space ratio of 5:1, a minimum non-residential floor space of 2:1, a building podium built to the street frontage, the building tower set back 3 metres from the street frontage, being the Pacific Highway, shadows to not extend beyond the extent of the 2036 plans, and consideration of matters of heritage significance. That is what's in the plan, and that's what we're required to address. Our disappointment with the officer's report is that it does not appropriately recognise the consistency of the proposal with the 2036 plan. And while there's a range of issues identified in the plan, most of which are deferred rightly to a DA stage, it does identify 2 key issues that have informed their recommendation. The first issue is a concern about isolation of an adjoining site. And the second is about concerns about the interface of future development with the lower scale development to the west. I just want you to make a few points on those, and then I'll hand over to Jeremy. It's important that the panel appreciates that the 2036 plan does not specify any requirements relating to minimum site area required for new buildings or require site amalgamations to achieve that. The 2036 plan also does not include any details that direct a single building be constructed on this site and an adjoining property. This property that's subject to this proposal is one of the largest in the Crow's Nest Centre, and concept plans that have been submitted with the proposal clearly demonstrate the ability to design future development on this site, complying with the ADG and other relevant considerations, including overshadowing of adjoining properties and in regard to achieving an appropriate relationship with adjoining sites. We have modelled the potential development of the land parcels to the north, the site that council is concerned will be isolated. And that modelling demonstrates that site has the potential also to achieve a standalone development on that site in accordance with the 2036 plan. Now, the council report asserts that such development on the adjoining site is not viable, but it presents zero evidence to support this statement. It's a very bold statement which is provided with no research or evidence base to support it, which is quite different to what the proponent was asked to do and which we did do. Now, in regard to the interface between high density development on this site, which it is at 18 stories, with medium density 4-story development to the west, which it's designated in the plan, this built form pattern is stipulated in the 2036 plan. This interface between high density and the medium density is a deliberate approach that was considered by the Department of Planning and other key stakeholders as part of the urban design modelling, shadowing modelling, impact assessments that were carried out to support the preparation of the plan. And it's true that in the modelling of that, there were higher densities considered than were in the final adopted plan. And the final building heights and the interface treatments that were adopted in the plan reflected that extensive modelling. Importantly, additionally, the building setbacks and envelope in the concept plans we have submitted in this proposal are fully consistent with the relevant objectives of the apartment design guideline. And in particular, objective 3F1, which requires adequate building separation distances shared equitably between neighbouring sites to achieve reasonable levels of external and internal visual privacy. Council's report states that the proposal does not satisfy or meet these objectives. We disagree with that. Detailed design at the DA stage will, of course, further address the minute details that are necessary to consider in regard to the relationship of proposed development with neighbouring properties, including design treatments to minimise impacts. However, given the compliance with the 2036 plan and compliance with the ADG objectives, we strongly disagree with the council officer's statement that the proposal will result in reduced amenity outcomes and inappropriate interface and transition outcomes. So Jeremy will take you through that in a graphic detail, but we submit today to the panel that there is an overwhelming evidence that this planning proposal demonstrates both strategic and site-specific merit. And we request the panel to progress this matter to Gateway and rightfully allow detailed design issues to be addressed both in the post-Gateway process and at the relevant DA stage as would be expected. I will now thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'll now hand over to Jeremy Bishop from Netherland Tribe to take you through his plans.
Thanks, John. Hi, panel. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks for your time this afternoon. What I thought we'd do would be basically cut to the chase to talk about a couple of critical issues in this development and council's response in the report. The first being building height, second one being our interface with the property on the western boundary, and the third one being the isolated or leftover site to the north, as John mentioned. I was hoping to, so just bear with me.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect. Firstly, in regard to height, I'm not going to get as technical as my learned colleague from Turner previously, but basically everything that he explained to you is very similar to our situation. The three main areas impacting our building height are our podium height, our podium garden, and our floor-to-floor heights of the tower. In each of these, I guess we can probably cover the podium height for the same reasons that Turner's had articulated, with new building codes, building regulations, opportunities to use flexible materials like CLT for construction. We just found that floor-to-floor heights have got to increase. Also, the quality of what the client wants to deliver along this highway precinct rather than working to minimums, it's unusual you actually go to brief to actually try and work to something of high quality and flexibility. So that was a relief. If I can then jump to the tower floor-to-floor heights, where again, like Turner's, we're proposing 3.2.
Peter, could you turn it up a bit?
Sorry, was that?
Yes, we're just having it turned up a little bit. Thank you.
That's all right.
You can keep going while we do this. Yep.
So our tower floor-to-floor heights again at 3.2 for all the reasons that have been stipulated before. I guess the main point of contention that we have between the council as well is our podium garden area, which is that area on level 3 you can see in the diagram. Again, we want to do something spectacular here. This is not a token rooftop leftover space. It's actually designed, we see that designed as a proper amenity, lush landscaping. To do that, we're proposing 6 metres, which is effectively not quite 2 stories. This will allow us to get deep soil planting, some reasonable height vegetation, and more importantly, some sunlight access into that space. We think that, for example, these are some precedent images of the kind of space we're trying to create there. So, as I said, it's not just a few pots with some plants in it. It's actually a considered whole level that the developer's actually sacrificing, which could have been GFA used for apartments, but he's prepared to actually give away almost 2 levels to create this asset we believe will contribute not only to our development, but the whole framework of Crow's Nest. You know, we actually think it'd be lovely at the top of all the podiums along the highway to have something like this, which connect up as a separate landscaped and community asset, but that's probably a bit too far reaching as a concept. So we believe that the building, as John said, it does comply with the control, which is the overshadowing to River Road, which is that top dotted line. So we think we tick that box. We're providing sensible floor-to-floor heights and good amenity to our podium garden, all of which are assets which we think are important. I'll then just move briefly to, any questions regarding height first?
No.
All right, terrific. The next item we want to discuss is just the rear setback to the west. Now this interface is obviously quite sensitive, but we've taken the approach to get to where we've got to. It was quite a logical evolution from the interpretation of the ADG and the strict compliance with the ADG requirements. So I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, but I think it's important that we all get on the same page. If I can just take you through this analysis very quickly, that would be much appreciated. So starting the rear, so the bottom left-hand diagram, the rear setback analysis. So this is the ADG separation for buildings in the same zone, which we're all familiar with. So it starts off at 6 metres on each side for 12 metre separation. It goes to 18, then 24 metre separation. So that's the typical ADG same zone separations I think we're all familiar with.
Jeremy, can you just blow that up a bit, please?
I may have to get some technical support.
Okay.
We can do that.
Or just give me a page number in your report.
Can't you just zoom in, Jeremy?
Oh, Virginia, you know me. I need technical support even to do that. Fantastic.
Is that one?
Just keep going down to the next one.
It's the bottom one, isn't it?
The bottom one. Let's start with the bottom one first.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Follow the numbers.
So that's the typical ADG, as I said, building at the same height in the same zone, habitable setbacks. If we go to diagram number 2, this is ADG separation, buildings of actually the same, this should be the same zone, the buildings of different height. So again, we start with our 12 metre separation from levels 1 to 4, which then increases to 18 metre separation up to level 8. Then the the part where the ADG remains silent is what happens when a building suddenly doesn't get any taller and the building across or opposite therefore has no separation requirements. We advocate, which we have done before in many developments, that once you get above that building height next door, that no additional stepping of the tower is required above the lower level building height, which is that hatch zone. So that's, I guess that's a preface that we believe is arguable and we have used before, because there is no separation if there is no building across the boundary from you. So if we can all agree to that, then diagram number 3, which is ADG separation for buildings of different height and different zone, habitable. ADG requires additional 3 metres setback between those buildings. So what we've done is taken the diagram below and have moved it further away from the boundary 3 metres to give us a 15 metre separation between the lower buildings and a 12 metre setback from the boundary. Is there any question regarding that? The difference is, in this diagram, it's not a property boundary, but we have taken it from the zone boundary. Because the inference from the ADG is that this additional 3 metre setback that we need is between different zonings. Okay, Curtis, we go to the next diagram. So effectively, this is what we're proposing, which is that diagram 3, which adopts those principles. So we have from the zone boundary, which is on the western side of the laneway, we have 15 metre separation between the buildings for the maximum 4-storey building, which is proposed under the controls, to our commercial podium. The difference is we have our landscape garden podium, which we set back even further, and the tower itself is then about 12 metres from the zone boundary. So we believe that following that logical progression of diagrams and what the intent of the ADG is, we believe that we do comply with the ADG building separation for a situation where there is a lower building opposite a taller building and the building separation that's required for that. Are there any questions regarding the logic or the outcome that we're proposing?
So your building is built on the street frontage, is it? Or is it set back?
On the highway side?
No, on the other side, on the west. Is it built to the street alignment or is it set back from the street alignment?
It's set back from the street alignment.
They haven't shown the property boundary there.
No, I guess our whole point is that we're not relating to the property boundary because it's the zone boundary that we're deriving the separation from.
Can you just show me on that diagram, Jeremy, where the property boundary is?
So it's 3 metres. So from the zone boundary, the laneway is 6 metres.
So is your building set back 3 metres from the property boundary?
Yeah. The podium is correct. So if we go to
I got too far.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, I've got it now. It's 3 metres.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, making me drunk.
Sorry.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, so that one.
Yep.
But we're also, the tower is set back 3 metres from the Pacific Highway as well, Jeremy.
Yeah, on the highway side, which was a DCP requirement. Any further questions on the western setback? No? All right.
No, you can continue on.
Terrific, thank you. The third issue or item we'd like to address is this residual site, or the way that we've actually composed our building and what a future development could be. The top diagram, which is the 2036, what we call amalgamated sites, proposed that it would be a single wide building with a large floor plate, effectively creating a street wall to the highway and to the laneway. The diagram below shows an alternative response, which shows separate sites potentially with two slender, smaller towers, which allow sunlight penetration between buildings. Not saying which one of these is better, but often it's seen that the benefits of the two slender towers, you stop that street wall, you allow daylight penetration through. And I recall for years that was one of North Sydney's principal urban design requirements for all their proposals was to create individual towers rather than block wall diagrams. Now, the question of viability as to the residual site and how that would be developed, the large plan you see there indicates how it could be laid out, which, yes, there are only 2 apartments per floor, but it seems that there's a bit of an appetite for more boutique, smaller developments with more intimate dwellings rather than large, massive dwellings which have 8 to 10 per floor. There's opportunity. You can see the dotted area on that diagram shows that we could increase that floor area if we had to. Just bear in mind the building separation to the south, which we're showing at the moment at 12 metres for habitable to habitable, and it could go down to 9 metres for non-habitable. So if area was an issue, we could increase the floor area of the tower and still comply with ADG separations. As a built form envelope and massing diagram, the diagram on the right shows the single tower as per the 2036 plan. The diagram on the left show the 2 slender towers as an alternative solution. I won't do a straw poll around the room, but to me, it's quite obvious that the 2 slender towers provide a much more interesting and development with less impact overall, and offers views through from the tower, from the building across the highway back out to the west, and just seems to respond a lot better to both the corner and to the finer grain, the smaller towers along the highway. So thank you for that. That's really the 3 issues in a nutshell that we can see had to be raised today. If there's any questions or any comment you'd like to go back and ask regarding those, I'm happy to field questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go to the issue of site isolation? And I hear what you say in terms of the 2036 plan, or strategy rather, but in terms of just the planning principle for isolating sites, what evidence has been provided to the council in that regard?
Perhaps before we answer that, Madam Chair, if it's appropriate, I might ask Barry Nesbitt, who is the owner of the site, to talk about this issue. Barry, happy to do that?
Sure, John. Thank you again to the panel for your time this afternoon. I hope I've got the thrust of the question correct. If I don't, please correct me after I give, I guess, the answer. What I take it that you're referring to is the commercial viability of the remaining site that would be on the corner of Hume Street and Pacific Highway. Is that correct?
Well, yes, just site isolation generally. Yeah, the viability of it.
Yeah, the viability of it. I represent the developer directly. As John, I think, quite eloquently said in the initial presentation, council's concern in this area has been backed up with, and I would politely say, 0 evidence of any support that there would be a lack of site isolation. There would be a site isolation problem because it would not be commercially viable to build. Jeremy also touched at the end of his presentation, saying that the market and the desire for those who are purchasing these types of apartments very much is angled and finds highly attractive a boutique style of building. From a development perspective, this site is a very viable site in the sense that the revenue that would be generated by 2 and 3 bedroom apartments And as Jeremy suggested, the actual site itself can be expanded in its floor plates if required. But the actual revenue generated from current sales on a per square meterage basis, which is currently averaging around $25,000 to $29,000 a square metre for these individual units, substantially supports the building of such a building of 18 stories and providing the number of units that it would construct. To further go on that just a little bit more, just to fill in the blanks. The building itself is a very efficient construction because of its floor plate type. It only has one core, which allows it to be the most efficient and cost-effective style of construction that can be done in that area. It also allows for the apartments to have theoretically, potentially zero common walls, which would actually increase the square meterage rate that a potential purchaser would pay. And as I'm sure you're all aware, especially for the apartments facing the western side, provides what would be described as exceptional views of Sydney Harbour and Lavender Bay, which means that overall, as a site, it's something, and I would comfortably say this from my own company's perspective, we as amongst many others, would gladly build that building in itself. And as Jeremy also said, whether it's better or worse to have one larger building or two smaller buildings, I think is probably up to conjecture and up to personal opinion. But from a large number of purchasers in the market, they would actually pay a premium to be in a smaller block because of the advantages that it actually gives in amenity and the advantages that it actually gives in from an architectural perspective as well. So with respect to the council officer's preparation of the report, I'd have to say there is many examples of buildings built of floor plates of this size in Sydney, certainly in Melbourne, and certainly also in southeast Queensland. Not just that, and not just in Australia, but obviously if you wanted to broaden that, there's obviously many other examples in other cities around the world. And they all generally provide a high-end, highly attractive product that is not just desired by developers, but is actively, in many cases, preferred.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just, if the panel was conscious of site isolation, have there been attempts to purchase, or is this the rationale that it's not required?
No, we've been engaged with the owners of the sites next door. I would never say that we wouldn't look at doing something in the future if the owners of the properties were so inclined. At this stage, they've all got varying degrees of desire. Some have none, some have some. But I think my point more accurately is that whether it's a good thing or not to amalgamate the site, I think that the more accurate way to look at it is that the sites can happily coexist as separate sites, as separate developments, and be successful, both from a commercial and an architectural point of view. It's not a mutually exclusive thing that one has to be better than the other. They both support themselves economically. And the nature of the height and the nature of the unique attributes that the site has with its view lines and its exceptional location, literally right across the road from the new Crows Nest Metro station, means that it is a premium site that will obtain a premium amount of revenue, which will quite comfortably allow that site to be developed by a separate developer, or if we were lucky enough in the future to do it even ourselves.
And Madam Chair, if I'd just like to add that the officer's report at page 11 in the top paragraph makes it very clear that the idea of a minimum lot size and the modelling that was done were not formally or incorporated into the final plan. They're just an insight into the department's thinking on it. So there is no status of that single story building. There is no specified minimum lot size. In fact, the modelling that was done looked at the potential of a minimum lot size of 1,500, I think it was, to accommodate development. The site that is subject to this proposal is about 1,500 square metres. So it's a big site already. And I just want to make the point that the reference to this as 2036 plans is actually not right. That it is the informing documents, but it was not incorporated as the officers have clearly stated in their report. So it's just a model of a potential outcome. There is an alternate potential outcome, and we have presented evidence to the council about efforts made by the proponent to talk to adjoining landowners. We've had regard to the site isolation principles established by the Land Environment Court. We've submitted that information. And as I say, up until recent times, we were understanding that council was quite understanding and accepting of that position.
Is it true that the site to the north won't achieve 1,500?
The site to the north, those which are, by the way, also heritage listed properties, is about 900 square metres.
So it doesn't come sort of anywhere near the 1,500.
And yeah, but remember, the 1,500 was modelled as being, optimum sizes, and that's what our site is. So if you think about it, it goes to 2,300 if you added that, 2,400, and there's no sites in that scale in this area. So this is appropriately dealt with, we believe, as two separate sites, as an alternative approach to what was modelled.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make that point that there is nothing in the 2036 plan that says you need to have a minimum site area or you need to consolidate lots. That is really an issue that's probably better dealt with down the stage as a DA.
Well, I suppose the issue then becomes is the 900 square metres large enough to accommodate all of the necessary setbacks and everything else.
Well, that's what we have provided. We have presented, Madam Chair, we've presented fully ADG compliant modelling as extracted on the diagram in front of you by Jeremy, that shows that building can meet all those standards and can be developed in accordance with the other provisions of the 2036 plan. So the answer is yes, it can be developed.
Madam Chair, just to clarify, because I think it's a good example where Jeremy's got the cursor on the floor plan now. As you can see, the 2-bedroom apartment is 85 square metres plus balcony, and the 3-bedroom apartment is 110 square metres plus balcony. As you can also see, that dotted line is around an extra 3 to 4 metres, which would also obviously obtain extra space if and when required by the developer. From a development perspective and from a commercial perspective, to answer your question on the ability of the site to be developed and therefore not left as an isolated site, 85. The reason why we've chosen those two particular sizes in this specific area is that they are both considered to be generous, especially in the 2-bedroom, generous in their size. They both also comply fully with the ADG compliances of cross ventilation and also obviously layout of units to make them the most amenable that they are possible. Finally, the other thing that we probably didn't touch on but is also important, and as John was just touching on before, the site itself is 900 square metres in its actual area, and it is bounded on 3 sides by light. This makes, in this instance, exceptional commercial and workspace / office space, of which being able to provide a gross floor area of around 2,400 square metres after setbacks. That would be by itself one of the larger, probably in the top 10 to 15% of office areas in Crow's Nest in one building, and provides also a exceptional floor plate for the provision of medium to medium, large and small businesses, considering that it has light on 3 sides and would provide premium office accommodation and premium retail accommodation because of its location on the corner block and its overall size. So from the perspective of it being commercially viable, and I won't go into what the potential revenues would be, because that would be something that's up to an individual commercial developer to determine. But from a revenue perspective, divided by the cost of construction, the site acquisition, the site would provide a very profitable purchase to those who could convince the current landowners that it was in their interest to sell at the current prices or even higher prices than what are currently being offered by the marketplace in the last 12 to 18 months.
Okay, I'll just see whether there's any questions from the panel.
Yes, Lloyd Graham here. In the document from council, there is a suggestion that the car parking be reduced. And I'm just wondering what your reaction is to that.
Yes.
And what effect that would have on your design.
I think obviously this planning proposal doesn't require any treatment of car parking. Council rightly says that at the end of that section that appropriate car parking numbers will be further determined during future DAs, and that's right. So our position is that whatever the codes are saying at the time of a DA, we will respond to the codes at that time. We're aware this site is situated directly opposite the new metro station. It is one of the most accessible locations in the new Crow's Nest Centre. There's clearly a case for car parking minimisation or maximisation, whatever probably maximisation is the better word. But we just think that's an issue to deal with at the DA stage. We're conscious that this planning proposal process, if it proceeds, will take considerable time. We don't know what the codes will be at that time. We will address them then. But I think we recognise, and Barry can speak for himself, that minimising car parking provision is probably the right thing to do.
Yes.
I had a question for is it Urbis?
Yes.
Just from the page 11 of the report, the SJB model showed, the development on the corner of the site, and that would seem to be a strong urban design response. But what's proposed is, it's not the amalgamation of the site. So in your view, is the proposed still, you think it's still got merit as opposed to
one of the things to recognise with that model of that SJB is that the sites that are located to the north of the site subject to this proposal are heritage items. They're heritage listed. There was no extensive evaluation of heritage impacts in that urban design modelling. It was just block modelling saying, here's a configuration of potential towers, assuming a range of things. So there's a range of factors that would have to be considered in the actual planning of the final building on that corner site. Obviously, we think that locating a tower, as shown in Jeremy's diagram there, close to the corner, I think it is of Hume Street and the highway, would be a good response to that site to provide a very strong urban form to that corner, and then that would optimise separation to the tower on our site. But I just want to stress that model that SJB did was highly conceptual and was done for one purpose, is to try to determine block size. It didn't consider things such as shadows or extensive heritage considerations or details which we are now dealing with.
But it seems that now you've got this isolated corner on the site with the heritage retained, it doesn't seem as strong as a response as if if you could amalgamate and do a corner building.
Well, we just think that,
and the SJB model, which was put up, that's sort of like a consolidation of you know, height going down to lower heights.
well,
And then they also got through site links to the is it the east of that building. So I wasn't sure how the proposal had dealt with that.
well,
I guess-
Jeremy, do you want to talk to that, Jeremy?
I guess, Virginia, we're not actually designing the site to the north. You know, we don't have control of the whole site. All we have control of is this central site, which is an infill site effectively. So if there were to be through site links, that's nothing that is shown up on the 2036 plan that we can see that affects our site. There could be some that go through the middle here, but it would seem, it would make more sense to me to have a through site link further up mid block rather than down here towards the street. I think you also have to acknowledge that potentially future development could have another tower in this position here and another one further up, all the way up to the corner, which does diminish in height under the plan. So there has been some consideration to, I guess it's a bit like the FSR argument, you know, just because they have an FSR doesn't mean you'll necessarily get that maximum FSR. You know, this as a building form doesn't necessarily mean you'll end up with this, because you know, this probably won't work from an ADG point of view. You won't get cross ventilation through, so you have to break it somehow to get more corners in here. So yeah, it's always hard when you see these kind of diagrams on the master plan documents and what they really mean. Often you don't, until you get to the DA detail, you really find out what they can generate rather than what you think they can generate from the diagram. So I think as a corner building, also something elegant and slender, you can imagine the similar building form on the opposite corner, which would respond really well, as opposed to two of these big blocks, which will have obviously other challenges. So,
Virginia, just to also clarify, it also does meet the FSR and setback requirements in the design.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of variables and it's how you detail it. But I mean, as an urban design response, one singular building to the corner. I mean, these are block models. They haven't gone into development yet, and there's no articulation or nuances of what they could be. And I guess you're saying you don't have control over the 4 sites, the 4 heritage listed.
No, we only have the control over the blue section, which, as it is, an infill development effectively.
And so just coming back to then you wanted to amend the maximum building height from 10 meters to, what is it, 166? And so your argument are the same as, you know, it's because of, like, you know, putting in thermal insulation to the top levels and set downs to.
That's right. And we're finding this is an issue not only with North Sydney Council, but all the councils we're dealing with at the moment, because all the planning controls, the numbers that people have come up with used to be like the old 4 stories was 12 meters, which, as we know, doesn't actually work now, because most councils want higher ground floor levels, and even under AGG it's 3.1 floor to floor, so you can never fit 4 stories, which was the intention, into 12 meters. So this is a common problem, and as previously mentioned, you know, with new requirements for fire rating, David Chandler's requirements for waterproofing, good building practices and flexibility in materials such as CLT and other options. It means that these kind of podium floor to floor heights are probably more realistic in modern building and modern design, as opposed to what may be generated at council's DCP stage. That also applies to the floor to floor height of 3.2, which, again, we're not, an extra 100 mil over 14 floors isn't going to get you another floor. So we're not trying to squeeze another floor into this by being smart about it. We're just being pragmatic and realistic about what you need to do to construct these things and deliver a good quality product, which is the same discussion, same reasoning behind our podium garden level, which rather than being squat and congested, which was suggested by council, because the council said, could you not reduce the floor-to-floor height down to 3.1, not reduce this garden level down to 1 story and reduce the podiums down to DCPs. We could do all of that, but it's delivering almost below average product now in the market today.
But I guess by doing that, you're just creating a wall to the street, and you stepped it back on the Pacific Highway side, but on the lane side, that's quite a tall wall to a narrow lane.
The podium.
The podium or the tower?
The podium. Well, no, the tower's stepped back, but the podium, it's quite a tall wall there to an already narrow lane.
Yeah, but but I suppose if you look at the building separation, we're still getting the 15 metres between future building and the podium. So 15 metres is your 12 metres under the ADG plus an extra 3 for the different zones. So
it might comply, but is it going to be a pleasant space? Like, it's going to be covered by shadow and it's narrow.
Well, the issue is that the 2036 plan envisaged buildings of this height in this location. So it obviously will have a shadow impact. But
and just another point, the 18 metres that you're requesting, that doesn't include the lift overrun. I think on the earlier scheme we just had, they'd actually taken the extra height and included the lift overrun.
So these heights doing their maximums up to the lift overrun. So it shows you what we've allowed to plant up there. We've got a taller top floor level, if you like, which was again to allow for insulation.
Yep.
Slab thicknesses, etc. Which is why we got the taller height on the top floor. So again, there's logic and practicality behind all of these.
We changed it that.
So yeah, I guess this delivers a product that will always be a struggle to deliver, both from a practical point of view and a buildability point of view. And quality point of view, whereas this is a much more realistic solution. But the main thing again is that we're still well below maximum height that we're allowed to go to under the 2036 plan. So we're not contravening any control.
The height plane, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we can't see why this can't be supported, seeing we tick that box. And it seems to be consistent with the approach that Turner's took, and as I said, it's typical with the approach that most sites are generating now in different councils as well.
And has been approved by the planning panel.
Okay. Any other questions from panel members?
Yeah, Jeremy, given that there's a 3 metre setback from the Pacific Highway and given the scale that's proposed, how do you think that will relate to the streetscape further to the south? I'm thinking the long group of heritage buildings, and this will just stand out alone, won't it? Do you think 3 metres is an adequate setback?
That's the DCP control, I believe, and I guess it envisaged that would be the setback all the way along the highway up to the corner to the south. So we actually we've said, I mean, the tower is one thing. It's probably the street facade and the podium facade that's probably more critical that you would perceive in relation to those heritage buildings. So,
Jeremy, just to be clear, the 3 metre is a 2036 direction.
That I understand that. I was just asking Jeremy his view about having an 18-storey tower that's set back only 3 metres in that streetscape, given that you've got the long row of historic buildings, which I presume are going to be kept and not be built over. I don't see how you could do that. No, I'm not. I don't mean the terraces next door. I'm talking about the ones further to the south.
Yeah, further to the south.
Oh,
yeah,
right, okay.
yeah. It's the ones next door. Again, I guess that's probably more of an issue for the next development when that happens to the south. They'll also have to be a bit more sensitive, perhaps, to those terraces. But I think you can see from our section that we acknowledge, even at our podium level, that we've set back the podium 3 metres as well, so that the street wall can actually continue that rhythm of the terrace that's there without necessarily just repeating historic terraces. So I think it's always a question as to what the right setback should be, but I often say between 3 metres and 4 metres and 6 metres, is there really a perceivable difference once you get to buildings of 18 stories?
Yeah. Does that 18 stories continue right to the south, behind all those heritage groups? Further?
No, it drops down,
it's 8 stories.
to 8 stories behind the heritage.
And even on the sites of the heritage buildings?
Yeah, it's 8 stories on the sites of the heritage building, and the 5 buildings directly adjacent are not heritage. They were built in the 1960s, I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm thinking of the group further to the south. I'm thinking of streetscape, actually, and the long views you get along.
Yeah, the group further to the south, right up to Shirley Road, is 8 stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the intention is that the height increases from Shirley Road up to the metro.
Yeah.
And builds onto St Leonard's.
That's right.
In that height plane, which is a sensible approach, I would have thought.
Just in the concept, I know it's concept, but you've introduced the arch to the streetscape podium. Is that like a contextual reference?
Yeah, that's just a teaser. The client insisted we put a sexy picture in. Planning proposals normally don't go into that level of detail. It's more FSR, building height and mass, and the detail comes out later on. But the client wanted to see what that could be, and how that may address kind of the street rhythm, the podium level, and the tower above.
Without sounding, look, I guess we very much pride ourselves on doing something. We actually do want to create something that's quite a beautiful structure, and something that from an architectural perspective really enhances the entire streetscape along there, especially considering it's opposite the metro. So the arch was, in effect, as Jeremy said, was probably something that we were looking at to see as an architectural concept. It's something we want to do something though that is far and away a much more elegant and identifiable, well-designed building, as opposed to just a nondescript apartment block with some commercial area below.
Yeah, no, I'm just interested.
Do you like the arches? Is that why you're asking?
Yeah.
That's a concept, isn't
it? Yeah, but it's very early stages.
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence of arches along the Pacific Highway.
No, it's just... Okay. So if there's no further questions by the panel? No. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the applicant and your team, and we will be making a recommendation only to the council. As you are aware, for planning proposals, we don't make a determination, only a recommendation for the council. So thank you all very much for participating, and I want you to feel sure that you've had your opportunity to have your say in this matter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do appreciate the time and the panel's attention to the matter.
Yeah, thank you, panel. Much appreciated.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Very well, thank you all. That's
Take care.
the close of this meeting for the planning proposals.